Okay, go ahead. Please, Masafumi.
Okay. So today we are going to informally discuss consciousness in general, in particular artificial consciousness and think communication, which Ryota will explain later. And first, I think that Ryota, can you share your screen? First, Ryota will cover the recent paper, which will be published in Forensic Neuroscience. And I was very impressed by this paper because this paper proposes a roadmap to artificial consciousness, and which seems like a concrete idea to me. So first, I'd like hear about this idea from Ryota.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let me start. Yeah. So I want to kind of briefly explain our idea about how we can build artificial consciousness. And so I took a few slides from a talk I gave with the title Consciousness and Intelligence. And so usually people think intelligence has nothing to do with consciousness. So you can have like an unconscious intelligent agent or conscious, some conscious animal without intelligence. So they're different. But I try to propose a different idea, which is that consciousness is a platform for general intelligence. And so I just skipped this one. Okay, maybe I should explain this. So so recently I have 3 ideas about how to build artificial general intelligence, and one of the 3 ideas is to build general intelligence by combination, and in my opinion, it's related to the concept of the global workspace theory of consciousness. And so the idea of combining combination is like this. So usually when you have a neural networks have a specific function. For example, like converting image input to a category or some category information to some writing or other modalities. So so the idea of building general intelligence by combination is just to combine many sort of task-specific functions like this. So, for example, like you can construct a new function by combining this function and this function. Then, you can sort of have a new function from the sound to writing and so on. And yeah, but to allow this kind of combination, we need to be able to combine different functions so that they share some common representation. And I connect that idea to the concept of global workspace theory. And so usually, like we see an image like this, and the typical idea is some information enters a task-specific module, and then once it reaches a certain level of processing, then the content of that information is shared across many different specific modules, and then that's the content of consciousness. But if information doesn't reach this global workspace, then it remains pre-conscious or unconscious. So people talk about this kind of theory in consciousness research, but on the other hand, I always felt this doesn't explain anything about consciousness. It's more of a like phenomenological description of neural responses related to consciousness. And yeah, but then when I thought about the connection between this global workspace and the idea of combining task-specific functions to generate new functions. We came up with the idea that this global workspace should be interpreted as a shared latent space. So if we the idea is something like this. So this is the paper Masafumi mentioned, which is written by Ulkan Van Rulen and myself, and it's going to be published in Transit Neuroscience. And so the idea is you have like many task-specific functions, and but then we are assuming that there's some way to connect. So all of these can be considered as some sort of encoders. So you can encode like images or like speech or language, and but then we want to have a common representation that can translate different representations across different modalities. Yeah, and maybe what's new is the introduction of this sort of cycle consistency. So this method was originally invented in natural language machine translation. The idea is you can encode many words in some sort of semantic space, just like what to bet. And so, for example, you can have a neural network that only used like a French text, embedded words in this latent space, and then we can have another network that embeds Japanese words, and then even without direct sort of like dictionary kind of correspondences, just by sort of rotating the space to match with each other, and then actually the neural networks can find correspondences. So basically, you can use this kind of method for unsupervised translation. And the idea is we could use something like this for translating between different neural networks. So it's a little bit like learning analogy between completely different representations. And so let me see. Yeah, and I think this is a little bit new concept for neuroscientists, because when we typically think about learning relationship between a visual and auditory stimuli, usually we assume we learn this kind of association from co-occurrence. So if two things happen together, then you may learn to learn some sort of common A model representation. That's a very common idea. But on the other hand, for example, if we think about synesthesia of let's say digits and colors, they don't necessarily occur at the same time, but we may identify some sort of similarity in the latent space, and then we may sort of find sort of arbitrary correspondences in the latent space structure. So that may be actually a possible explanation why some people have synesthesia, and we may actually use that kind of analogy kind of reasoning across modalities. And also we are speculating that this kind of sort of cross-referencing between different representations may be the way how we grant meaning to individual representations. So, for example, the feeling of color may have some similarities to other modalities, but this relationship is usually not very explicit. But once we have this kind of sort of cycle consistency sort of correspondence, then across many modalities, we may gain some feeling to sensory experiences. Yeah. Okay. So this is the cartoon of how it works. So for example, maybe one important concept is embedding of tasks. So in neural networks literature, there are methods to encode tasks. So for example, there's a method called task to vec, or taskonomy is another way to represent tasks. And so for example, in this case, we have only like 4 modules, and so in one situation, the task or encodes that current situation, which is like in this case walking in the jungle, and then when this agent sees a tiger, then this visual information is encoded and then copied to this global latent workspace, and then because of this sort of context information from the task, then this information is connected to this output. So for example, for the movement, so escape, run away from the tiger. But if we are in a different task context, so for example, visiting the zoo, and then this information could be combined to the speech of sort of saying, I see a tiger or something. So yeah, so this is the general idea, but we are sort of hypothesizing that we have this kind of shared latent space, which can be used as some sort of like a connection between different modules. And actually, like all the components in this idea can be implemented with modern deep learning methods, and especially like now the method called transformer is getting very popular, which works as a gating mechanism in global workspace theory. So that's my description of this idea. So I want to have your comments, and and we want to discuss whether this is relevant for consciousness or yeah.
Okay. So, do you want to start, Masafumi, or?
Yeah, I have a question and about new translation between modalities or translation between 2 different languages. You showed the example of translation between different languages, which is remarkable. But I think it can be done in principle because that we are sharing the same environment, and for example, dog and cat are same for the 2 speakers, different language speakers, but for translating different modalities, we need to translate totally different things, right? So how can we do this? How can we so it's much more difficult, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So of course, we can align these representations in a pairwise manner, but of course, they can be completely different. So yeah, so sometimes it may not be straightforward. So this alignment may not be perfect, and also like when these things represent. Yeah.
It will not be perfect at all, I think. But my question is that we can do some meaningful alignment between totally different things, like totally different manifolds, right? With different geometry or different topology.
Yeah.
Can we extract some meaningful, correspondence between 2 totally different manifolds?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I sometimes discuss this also with Rufan. He might have a different opinion, but So the sort of discussion we had was whether this kind of like global latent workspace is constantly aligned, so that it's always in a kind of it's constant, but between modules there's always some sort of alignment, so it tries to find some optimal latent space. But maybe another way is so this system could be also more flexible. So depending on the situation, like the brain could try to find sort of useful alignment on the fly. And so so for example, I don't know, maybe the global alignment between two modules it's difficult, but even so, like you may be able to align the part you are interested in. So then you might want to have some sort of flexible alignment for more like locally relevant stuff. So that's also possible.
So you don't aim to make sort of global correspondence between two different modalities, but you do this in locally.
Locally, yeah. So not the whole manifold, but maybe only the relevant part.
I see. And also that this global workspace is among multiple modalities. So, but in the example, you only show the example between two different languages, and can you do this or can you find the shared representation among multiple, more than two different modalities?
That should be possible. Yeah,
that should be possible. So it's a sort of straightforward extension.
Well, yeah, if you do in a pairwise manner, that's probably very tricky. But basically, what you want to do is to sort of quantify the mismatch and then minimize it using just normal neural network. So for mutual transformation. So so you can sort of define some sort of global laws, or you could also do this in a pairwise manner.
So can I make some comments about this point? What I was reading your paper and also watching Rufan's video and so on, I also found this cycle consistency part to be potentially interesting or new to neuroscience field or psychology or cognitive science. Whether that's relevant for consciousness or not, that's a bit debatable, and maybe we can talk about it later. But one thing I thought also, which addresses on Masafumi's comment, is that this matching should be probably very weak and also loose. Like this is the idea from a category theory of adjunction or functor, and I think this kind of idea is when it's properly kind of implemented, maybe that's potentially useful for these applications. And what I mean by that is that let's say if by transferring from vision to audition and then back to vision, you don't really need to make any kind of correspondence between the original vision to the another coming back vision input output from the audition to vision. But as long as, let's say in the case of these 3 people or 4 people in this visual image translated into the audition and then coming back to present, just like having only one of the human figure, then you accept that kind of translation. That's the sort of the close enough kind of loop of the translation. And I think this kind of really loose and very weak kind of loop is much more relevant for this type of cross-modality matching, not only theoretically but also empirically from the cross-modal matching. We recently talked about this in the lab meeting, but many people talk about cross-modal matching or correspondence starting from, let's say, loud sound and also intense visual input or something like that, right? But it's not necessarily the case that loud sound always accompanies with the intense vision. And the fact that it can be discordant is the power of having these two things at the same time in consciousness. So if the association between the modality is too strong, it's actually also useless. And also it's not, our experience is not formed like that.
Yeah.
Right? Even if you start to have some expectation to have a too much influence on the other side, then as you said, Ryota, that synesthesia kind of stuff happens probably. But in reality, in most of the cases, our conscious experience is not like that. Expectation or imagination doesn't rarely generate strong qualia in other senses. It's really weak, and that should be the goal of this kind of translation, I think. That was one thing I wanted to say.
Yeah.
And by making it loose intentionally, then probably matching across the modality also start to become more realistic. Starting from some kind of fixed goal of something to which everything needs to be matched. That I don't think is not gonna be useful first of all, and also is also not gonna be found in the brain as well from the neuroscience point of view.
Yeah. So I have a similar idea. So this like cycle consistency based matching could be loose. Maybe it should be loose.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it kind of sounds similar to some functor. So it doesn't have to be bijective. And also.
But the question is that has there been any kind of attempt to make this kind of correspondence really weak intentionally, and then see whether that kind of machine is actually more useful than the other type?
Well, I don't know if it's important to intentionally make the association weak. If we represent different things, it has to be kind of loose connection. But maybe what's interesting is even if we compare two rather different things, they may have some similarity in the structure. And so that kind of loose correspondence could be, maybe it seems kind of useless for us, but in some cases, actually, this kind of analogy is useful for example, few-shot learning. So if we learn about something in one domain, and then there's no sort of reason to assume that we find the same structure in other domains. But if we find some sort of random similarity between two different modalities, then actually like using the structure and sort of past experiences from previous tasks could be actually useful. So in a way, this is sort of making analogy to solve new problems, and there's no reason for this to work, but maybe in practice it might work better than sort of learning everything from scratch.
Yeah.
So it works as transfer learning.
Yes. But my concern is that, of course, that I agree that this loose connection, loose correspondence is useful sometimes, but there could be many possible way of finding the match between two domains. And how can we find the sort of sub-optimal one, or how can our brain find something useful among many possible, correspondence?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, as I said, this could be sort of performed continuously in the brain, or maybe, by thinking that we may actually, sort of try to find the alignment with some mental effort. So I think both are possible. So yeah, so for example,
the mystery is that it seems like many people, us, share the same, global rated workspace. Global rated workspace seems like similar among many subjects.
Yeah,
like so to me. So how can our brain find the same thing?
You mean the intersubjectively, the structure of the global latent space seems similar among many people?
Yeah, my guess is.
But how do you know that we even have this kind of global latent workspace like thing in the brain?
I mean, we have common sense about the analogy, right, between two modalities.
Okay, so what you're talking about is something like a common sense.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So based on this theory, it means that we are sharing the similar global rated workspace. Right? So how can we find this similar global rated workspace among many possible solutions about matching between different?
But I think for specific things, we probably have like similar latent space structure. For example, maybe for numbers, they are probably encoded in a similar way. For example, like people with like graphing color synesthesia, they tend to associate number 1 with red, and also like maybe alphabet A tends to be red. So in my mind, like this kind of sort of commonality in sort of arbitrary association across subject suggests that maybe we have like similar latent space representation for 1 and A and 1. And red. So yeah, but I think that's probably we have some sort of like this kind of ordinal representation for many things. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and A, B, C, D, and for some reason like red tends to be primary in different colors. So then we have some similar latent space for each of these, and then this maybe through cycle consistency or something, the brain finds some sort of correspondence between these things, and that's why we have this kind of synesthesia. But maybe not everyone has this graphing color synesthesia, but maybe for the famous Kiki Buba association, like for different shapes, we have also association of sounds. And so that's again probably reflect something about the latent space of these sounds or shapes.
Well, I can kind of understand why we want to go to that kind of conceptual or more abstract thing. If you start from this kind of more machine learning type application, I think it's probably more meaningful or in terms of investigation, probably more likely to be productive if we go from space itself. Actually, space is probably highly grounded and shared even across evolution, and also many animals, even potential plants as well. And the structure of the neurons or neural systems are also primarily the first thing that many neurophysiologists find is that there is a receptive field that talks about particular point in the space, right? And that is consistent across all the modalities. And how this space is constructed is, the most fundamental kind of the geometric invariance in a sense. There is an extent and there is a relations, and this is also, something that Andrew Hon and Tonori, mainly talks about there in their, space paper. But this space per se is likely to be shared across all the modalities, and also, correspondence between them is, in a sense, most, naturally implemented in the brain. Like the first thing you notice in across the visual field, visual cortical, layers is that, one part of the neuron that responds to a particular area in the, visual field projects to the neurons that also responds, to the around the same area, right? I mean, because of the shared connection and so on, it has to be like that. And between vision and audition or touch and so on, these kind of spatial alignment is the first thing to be established. And after that, many things can be, built upon that. But I think that's the first thing to consider in terms of the alignment. And that could be looser or, tighter depending on the type of the modality that can locate things. And this is probably even possible to do under the, before you're born in the, mother's belly, or, right after you, you're born as a baby.
I agree. Space should be very fundamental, and also we use space also for like analogy, and also once you have space, you can also have like motion, and so I also feel maybe orientation or color could be also built on the top of space representation. But in the context of this global latent workspace, my guess is I don't know so much. I don't feel so much space from sound, but well, on the other hand, maybe like for the sound localization type of thing, we also use, but actually share the space with visual perception. So in that sense, space is shared, and also analogy with space is used. So for example, like for describing the pitch of sound, we use high and low, and that's that concept from also spatial representation. So we make that kind of association, and probably that comes from this kind of common latent space.
Yeah. And in that sense, I think, the conversion or some kind of inference from the sensory sort of the space to motor space or cognitive map type space, that's the kind of the translation that is, in a sense, most fundamental kind of thing that has been already kind of studied by the lots of neuroscientists and cognitive scientists and psychologists. But that's probably the first easiest kind of, well, maybe most important kind of this cycle consistency type learning would be applied, right?
Okay. So far, this is purely sort of machine learning problem or computational neuroscience problem. But you also connect this to consciousness, and so in this theory, how the content of consciousness is explained.
But you mean like Qualia type of subjective experience?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so we have been kind of careful about making claims in relation to consciousness. So obviously, we don't know whether building this generates conscious experience internally. So in that sense, it's just a sort of inspiration from the consciousness research to build the general purpose AI. So that's kind of sort of conservative standpoint. But on the other hand, maybe our sort of a stronger speculation is that like this kind of sort of global latent workspace also characterize the experience. So this is more of a speculation. This sort of representations or like latent space can sort of give kind of meaning to the other representations. So, for example, like if I say like red is associated with one, or maybe many other different things, like maybe red also means like a traffic light, to stop, and things like that, or maybe like for food, like a red is associated with fruits, which can be eaten and so on. So in that sense, like this kind of the context enriches the meaning of like each sort of sensory experience. So in that sense, this works as a sort of like a ground, sort of like in the context of symbol grounding. So just having one representation in one modality means only so much. But if that's also related to many different things implicitly through this kind of shared latent space, then it has a much richer meaning, and that may be the reason why it's very difficult to describe experiences. But at the same time, this kind of experience means something, and that meaning comes from the relationship to like many other things. So that's how we sort of connect this kind of sort of idea to consciousness.
But in the original global workspace theory, in my understanding, it says that first that the global workspace should accumulate information from many different modalities, and then when this global workspace broadcasts this accumulated information to the many other modalities, then the contents of broadcasted information corresponds to the contents of consciousness. I think this is roughly the idea of original global workspace theory.
Yeah.
So what do you think about this? And you also emphasizes the broadcasting should be important in this your theory as well. But
yeah, that's a good point. So one kind of maybe like implicit idea is that if also in this global latent workspace, that the task is also encoded. So, and when you have the task information, that information is used as a sort of a query in terms of the transformer language. So basically, so that information works as a kind of like a selector for the module. So if a task is to look for some animal, then it kind of opens a gate for the animal detection module, for example. Yes.
I see.
Like attention, right?
So this broadcasting involves kind of like a feedback to all the modules. And in terms of actual implementation, that's the query in transformer. And and also they could there was a recent paper that actually implemented something like similar from Benjio's group, and so they of course, there are a lot of differences in detail, but then their broadcasting is basically sort of changing the state of the individual modules.
What you have been saying, you said a lot of things in the last comment, but through the relationship to specify more meaning, or bring the context or possibility and the counterfactual and things like that are highly consistent with what we are also talking as a core property of the query, right? But implementation level, or sort of the goal of this model, or the exact way these are implemented are probably different. But I think your idea is closer to what we are thinking in terms of relation, or the way things are corresponds more to do with the query, rather than what we have to limit what we can do, or with what we can report as query, right? In a sense.
Yeah. I always feel like there must be some similarity to category theory, but I'm not. I don't really understand category theory, so I want to hear your opinion about this. So when you talk about category theory, you talk about relationship of relationships or something like that. And in my mind, like individual latent space represents relationship, for example, between different words. So, for example, when you encode many words, then this latent space of words represent relationship between different words. So if they're close to each other, then they have similar meaning, and then direction in this latent space corresponds to some semantic meaning. And then when I say so alignment between different modules, then we are sort of aligning relationship or latent spaces, different latent spaces. But we try to find sort of good correspondences between them. So that seems like we are aligning relationships. So that's like a relationship of relationships. So do you see a way to sort of apply category theory to interpret this kind of sort of analogical thinking?
Yeah, so that's what we are kind of trying to do as well. But the more I think about this kind of approach, the critical thing starts to become clear, which is that when we talk about the relationship, we have been so far focusing on similarity relations, like a subjective judgment of the similarity between red and purple and things like that, right? But when we only consider one type of the relationship, it's always insufficient. So the next generation of our relationship-based experiment, which will be also part of this Qualia Structure grant, is that we try to combine different types of the relations. Andrew's and also Julio's paper talks about multiple relations in terms of the space, right? Like inclusion or overlap or intersection and so on. Something like that at the level of the concepts, maybe relatedness or association or preference or something like that. And the preference and the similarity seems to be a relatively tractable kind of things, like physically first. And I think even just two different kind of relations can probably distinguish many different kind of modality based on the topological relations of those two things, right? Like in the case of, for example, let's say visual cases, two similar things should be similarly ordered in terms of preferences. But in the case of, let's say, smell, this is a hypothetical. Really similar smell may or may not be completely, different in terms of the ranking of the preferences. That may characterize the sort of the topological property of the smell versus vision, and something similar may also happen in terms of, vision and audition and tactile or taste and things like that. But the important thing is that when we talk about the relationship of the relationship, we also need to think about the relationship of the relationship of the relationship. But when we only talk about the similarity relationship only, then it's quite trivial and also probably really easy to overfit just doing so. And then it becomes really very difficult to do this, loose mapping, I think.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So, yeah, so when I think about like this kind of latent space in neural networks, usually it's like a Euclidean space and like a vector space, so you can do addition and things like that. That's useful, but lately we have been thinking how to encode tasks, and for simple things, it's possible, but for many operations, operations are non-commutative.
Yeah.
So like doing A after B is different from doing
Exactly.
B after A, and so we need to encode sort of non-commutative relationships also, and it hasn't been done much, but sometimes I see sort of sometimes in some papers people try to define sort of so something like distance, but asymmetric, so it's not distance, but that kind of representation is possible, and also there has been an attempt to use sort of discrete latent space, but these things are not very popular. But I think when we want to sort of encode more complex things, we may also want to have like maybe more non-commutative kind of space. I don't know how to represent that with neural networks, but yeah, but I think there seems to be some sort of fundamental limitation in like using like all continuous differentiable space.
Yeah. So first of all, about asymmetric distance like thing, that's also definitely something I'm also thinking about, and that's the reason why I'm also interested in quantum cognition. And there is a version of the quantum cognition talking about the similarity relationship, which I really like that, and also we've been collaborating with Jerome Buzemeyer and also Emmanuel Posos. And the idea here is that if you ask, is China similar to North Korea, then many people say no. But if you ask, is North Korea similar to China, many people say yes. So this is a most sort of intuitive kind of similarity asymmetry. But we recently found that the color patch also, there is some kind of similarity asymmetry. Like after seeing red and then reddish purple is rated as more similar, but after the reddish purple, red is not similar. It's only really small thing. But the one mathematical framework that can allow us to model this is indeed the quantum mathematics, right? We are not really thinking that this implies that the quantum mechanics is at play in the brain, but just as you said, if the order matters, A and then B or B and A, it's just kind of the adaptation or framing or priming kind of stuff happening. And if that is sort of fundamentally or lawfully predictable, as quantum cognition suggests, then it's probably that's the kind of the implementation that brain is also doing. There are many interesting possibility about that. So we are looking at that, and also in terms of the asymmetric distance, I think effort is also something interesting, right? Like from here to top of the mountain, it's a lot of effort, but from mountain to here, at the bottom, it's low effort. So there should be a lot of asymmetric relationship in terms of effort or energy, even in a machine learning or estimation of the cost for the time and so on. So resource theory or something like that would be probably useful. I don't know. I don't know exactly other types of the theory or space has been proposed, but that's definitely interesting kind of direction. And I'm thinking that that kind of relations, asymmetric distance relations, are also the kind of the relation that should be, characterized in terms of the characterizing relationship between the qualia as well.
Yeah, back to the now's previous comment about we need to care about the multiple aspects of similarity to characterize qualia, and I of course agree with this view, but in this sense that it seems like to me that the latent space in each modality is also important for characterizing qualia, not only the representation in global latent workspace is important. I mean, in the original global workspace theory, it says that only the contents of global workspace is determines the qualia or contents of consciousness in my understanding. But of course, this is important. I mean, the shared latent space is important. It should be important. But I think that to characterize our qualia, maybe latent space in each modality is also very important.
I think that's a really good idea, and there was a very related question on YouTube actually, which composes of two questions. But one is this: do you believe that the global latent workspace exists in humans? And in a sense, Masarumi's question is that it's not like one global latent workspace, but sort of sub version of this existing in each modality may be more promising or realistic,
maybe
right?
these things also determine our contents or our qualia.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm curious. Yeah, what's the link to the YouTube?
It's here, and also
this is a question from the audience.
Yeah. The I also, one of the things, I have many issues with the global workspace theory, but one of the things that I have is that let's see if Ryota, you have actually worked on this, eye movement to the visual to eye movement modality kind of space, but there the visual input to the brain or superior colliculus goes into LIP and also so on, and then also FEF, that is a prefrontal cortex, and then that projects back to superior colliculus or inferior colliculus, no, superior colliculus, I guess, and then brainstem, and then also generate the highly flexible eye movement, right? This kind of move doesn't seem to involve anything like global workspace per se, but it's more similar to what Masafumi has kind of proposed. Like each of the prefrontal cortical module or parietal cortical module is relatively small, but it's not really general enough to call it as a global workspace, and still there is a little bit of the transformation in terms of the connectivity with other areas, but it's also highly specialized. And we also don't know how much of the neurons over there, especially FEF and also LIP, is really doing eye movement stuff. But that's the kind of program I also have. These are unrealistic, possibly.
So are you thinking like we may have some sort of like a global workspace for eye movements or sound, or so it's kind of like a intermediate level of global workspace.
Yeah, not really global in that sense.
Not global, local, but really abstract level representation.
Yeah, but I think but from the sort of maybe like a unity of consciousness kind of viewpoint, that this global workspace should include like everything. Now, of course, maybe for unconscious behavior, we may have those more specialized sort of global network, but yeah, but I guess the point of having this kind of sort of shared latent space is to coordinate many things together. So so eye movement should be also no should be sort of considered in the context of how do you say the overall behavior. So also it's connected to the task, and also it's relevant for so eye movements shouldn't be just considered in isolation. It should for the sort of coherent agent. It should be just part of it.
Yeah, I also have a now kind of idea about that. So normally people think that this kind of a global coherent thing is necessary to control this one agent in a coherent manner, right? That's a sort of the standard kind of idea. One idea that I really like to pursue more is this idea of the topos or pre-sheaf. It's related to category theory again, but this is also related to quantum mechanics as well. And what aspect I'm interested in is that it allows basically to be globally inconsistent, but locally when it attaches to, then this point needs to be consistent. So and this one is interesting in the sense that for example, when I see the impossible figure that is composed of these three poles, and the body is connected at the end, and if you look at that part, then you see that there should be like two throngs should come out from there, but in reality there's three things or something like that. And here it's not really impossible. Locally we are seeing each things validly, but at the level of the global perception, because of the loss of the attentional resolution or whatever, we don't really feel like one object as a whole, it's not inconsistent. Something like this is really natural for our not only perception but also cognition. Locally, things are making sense, but and in the sort of the patchy manner, the connected part is also making sense. However, as a global thing, if you have such a global view at the same time available, then it doesn't look like consistent at all. And this is really consistent logical framework that allows us to explain these things. I don't know how to implement it in AI, but at least I feel like this is something I need to write about in after learning more and also present.
I think local consistency is and but coming back to the original question, I think it's actually meaningful to look for like this kind of like global latent workspace in the brain. And I haven't like really figured out what kind of criteria should be satisfied to count as global latent workspace. But maybe the most similar thing is probably this maybe working memory. So so when you have maybe one possible way is to sort of find a brain region that works as working memory, and then that represents different things. So the same area represents auditory information and visual information depending on the task, for example. So that would be a signature of this kind of global latent workspace. And another thing is to test whether the brain uses this kind of cycle consistency. So, for example, we can train human or animals to learn new sort of statistical regularities, and then we based on the stimulus, we can sort of assume certain type of latent space, and then so maybe we so train the subject with like visual artificial stimuli and auditory artificial stimuli, and then try to see whether they are somehow align with each other. So that's a potential like new experiment for neuroscientists. Yeah, because I think what's new is that in neuroscience, you always cross-modal learning involves some sort of like a simultaneous stimulation, and but here the interesting sort of implication is we don't need to receive inputs at the same time, but the brain figures out the structure similarities by itself.
Okay.
Okay, so I think that the 1 hour has already passed. Maybe it's time to move on to the next.
That's what I predicted, Right? Oh, maybe we can talk about the second part of your presentation next.
Think communication is another interesting topic.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to discuss.
So think communication. Okay, so this is what we want to do in the Moonshot project, and also like in general to sort of establish new kind of brain machine interface. And so here now again I'm using the analogy with like neural networks. So we take their brain as an encoder. So like if it sees an apple, then somehow the visual information is encoded in the brain's latent space. And then once we have this representation, we can talk about it, or we can draw a picture of it, and so on. And then when we communicate this information to another person, then another person needs to encode the word, and then think about the same thing. But then the idea is if we can directly communicate this the contents of the latent space to another person by decoding the latent space and then injecting information to another brain, then we can communicate with another person directly. And I took this image from our collaborator Hayashi-san, and also like Sasai-san at Araya is working on this theoretical part. So the idea is, it's now very common to decode from neural activity about the contents of sort of let's say like a visual category. And so we usually we have a decoder for individual animals or people, and then what we want to do is to sort of create shared latent space across different animals. So for example, let's say we can encode like a lot of neural activities from like two animals, and then try to find common latent space using the same kind of machine translation cycle consistency. And then once we have a shared latent space, we can decode information from like all the aligned animals. Yeah, so the idea is like when you record from many neurons from one monkey, we don't know which neuron corresponds to which visual information. But then the idea is if we manage to encode all of them, many neurons, then each neuron is like word, like in the language example. So basically, we don't know which neuron means what, but but we have some sort of rough correspondence between neurons, even without labels, so in an unsupervised manner. And once we have this kind of latent space, we can also use it for communication. So let's say we train a decoder from one monkey. And so in one monkey, we have basically a dictionary. But then if we have a latent space, or shared latent space, then we can sort of translate activation of one monkey to another monkey. And then if we don't have a good method for stimulation yet, but in principle, we can sort of reproduce the sort of activity pattern that means the same thing to another monkey. So that's the idea of think communication. And yeah, so that's what we want to do. And of course, like in the Moonshot project, we have like many different phases, but this is one of the things also related to the global latent workspace. And so in that sense, here like we are thinking about building like a shared the global latent space across individuals, across animals. And yeah, so if we can do this, maybe we can also connect humans to other animals, and we can sort of maybe potentially we can also connect our brain to bats, and then try to sort of find some similar latent space, and then I think sort of experience some analogical experience or something like that. So that's the idea. Okay.
Okay, so maybe can I ask a question or comment?
Yeah, of course.
So the first thing is that Hayashi-san, I know of this project since his time of Sakigake in probably 2010 or so, right?
Yeah.
And then basically with IT and so on, the visual cortex, he tried to do something like this. And then at that time, at least, he was trying to stimulate the neuron of the second monkey so that the second monkey would report, let's say, the first monkey's percept of this, let's say, apple or something like that. And so in this new project, you're not going to pursue that kind of stimulation to transfer the percept itself, but also rather trying to do something more indirect, right?
Well, ideally we want to stimulate, but through my discussion with Hayasan and other people, it seems very difficult to sort of inject or stimulate precisely individual neurons. So in that sense, it's probably not very feasible. So unless we have much better methods that better than electric stimulation.
Yeah, that's
so maybe in early phase, we even without animals, we could just use like simple neural networks like BCG, and then try to do this artificially. So that's one way to test the concept, and also probably decoding from other animals without labels is a next step. So that's probably possible. And another sort of idea I discussed with some people is that maybe for object recognition, visual objects, we need very fine stimulation. But for example, this principle should also work for, let's say, motion perception. And so we know that for motion perception, electric stimulation can bias monkeys' reports. So in that sense, so the idea is we want to be able to sort of like direction selectivity of let's say MT neurons without mapping individual neurons. So just by looking at sort of firing patterns of everyday life, we want to be able to tell which neuron has like an upward sensitivity rather than downward or rightward and so on. So that's the So maybe in other modalities, maybe electric stimulation may be sufficient. So then the key point is just about sort of finding this kind of direction tuning without presenting stimuli just by looking at neural activities. So in spirit, I think it has some similarity to IIT because we only want to look at intrinsic properties.
Yeah. So okay, then there are two more things. Then in relation to IIT, that's the one thing. But also another thing is the Nicoletas or somebody has been doing this type of experiment in rats, right? Like training or recording from one rat and then injecting that output as a sort of some kind of threshold and process kind of things, and then the second rat will press this button or that button and so on. And so what's in a sense different from these kind of technique or technology in terms of where you want to go, or what this actually can tell us.
Okay, so actually it's very difficult to well, I need to actually look into Nicoletta's paper and think about how it's actually different. But I think a lot of animals can sort of use information coming from other animals through learning. But in this case, we want to be able to sort of determine the role of individual neurons without actually learning or without sort of mapping the properties of neurons. Yeah, so in that sense, maybe for practical purpose, we don't. Yeah, so it's probably more useful because we don't need to go through calibration to watch a lot of movies or something like that. We just so the ideal situation is that the subject just needs to sort of go through daily life, and then we get a lot of spikes, and then only from the sort of relationship between spikes, we want to be able to map neurons into a common latent space. So it is a different approach.
Then that comes to the part or in relation to IIT, but this type of approach, I think is interesting and potentially possible to work, but unless we know the connectivity or the way that neurons are actually communicating with them, it may work in some highly limited case where you just hit on to kind of right neuron or right way of stimulation to so that you can completely ignore all this background situation or background connectivity difference between the different individuals. But IIT is, in a sense, it's all about the connectivity plus states of the neurons. And if the connectivity is different, the same states also gives rise to completely different things. So it seems like this approach is, hoping that, without really knowing any connectivity issues, you might be able to achieve the same kind of functionality or, conscious experience by activating the neurons in the same way. I think that's a bit too difficult.
So if we sort of want to have the precision IIT requires, it's always difficult. So for real neural systems, we cannot know all the connectivities, and and also if we want to know the weights of synapses, that's almost impossible. And so in that sense, this is more of an empirical approach, and in many cases we have to do it that way anyway. So we don't know what scale to look at and so on. So we don't even know whether looking at individual neurons is sufficient, or maybe it could be too much. We don't need all the details, but maybe my motivation is related to sort of bypassing the difficulties of IIT. So it could be we could use in a later slides, I also think about encoding neural networks as a meta representation. So that's also again kind of my sort of different approach to sort of capture intrinsic properties of a network and so on. So yeah, so of course, if we want to, if we start from IIT, like any real neural system is very difficult to handle. But even so, maybe just by recording, we may be able to, capture some aspect. So so that's my kind of pragmatic approach. Yeah, but I think that's what everyone has to do when we want to apply IIT to real neural signals. We never, maybe except for certain very simple systems, we have to sort of assume some sort of dynamics. We need to approximate mechanisms or dynamics from observation.
My issue is not really about whether this is really faithful or realistic from the viewpoint of IIT or not, but more to do with again coming back to also our proposal. But if the relationship is really all the things that is important, then just transferring the states of activity from one brain to the other may not turn out to be the best way to go, right?
But the key thing here is that we have some translation between two brains, which takes account of relationship between different things, like a different visual stimuli, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense,
that's the idea.
Takes account of relation.
Yeah. So if we take just 100 neurons from two monkeys, and we don't know which neuron corresponds to which neuron, but we try to match them as much as we can before we send the signal from one monkey to another. So in that sense, we have some rough approximation of correspondences.
Yeah. That one I can understand. Also, this is something that also Masafumi and I talked about a really long time ago when you were here in Melbourne, right? If we have even if we have a perfect mapping of the neurons and also states to do the perfect IIT, which neuron corresponds to neuron 1 of this brain and then neuron X of this brain, unless we know this label matching, that if we have the shape of the qualia for this brain, how can we actually map this another shape coming from this one? That's the problem, right? And IIT's kind of solution is like through matching or through the symbol grounding problem, but your hope is by looking at the spontaneous activity or something like that, you can already try to match this in terms of some kind of topological correspondence, right?
Yeah, that's the idea. Yeah, and the important thing here is that this matching is done based on structure level, not just one-to-one mapping, but whole structure should be matched between two brains. The whole structure of representation.
So you mean not only one particular area of the brain, but also across many neurons, or?
No, not really. Even in the one modality, we have this kind of neural representation of different, qualia or different visual stimuli. So whole things should be matched between two brains, between two different brains.
But by the way, it's a bit of the digression. But have you heard of this concept of dark neurons?
Yeah, but I don't know.
Yeah, I was listening to this, brain inspired, to partly to check your talk, Ryota, with that guy. But in the recent episode, spikes or something like that, I knew something like this, but there was a paper by Oizumi, right? Recently, finally, probably also Murayama-san's, data will speak about that. After imaging all the neurons, that can be confirmed by the optical imaging, you can see how many neurons are actually firing. And then it turns out that, it's like, less than 3% or something like that of the neurons are contributing to this, previous measure of the, spiking or something like that. But many neurons can actually spike. And then they spike really, low frequency, and also we can't really know what they are doing. So these are the kind of the neurons that are present, pretty much everywhere, and even in V1. So, if you start to think about all these neurons, role in structuring things, it would be, super lucky if something like this would work.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, that's very, very low, 3%.
Maybe I'm wrong, but but if I remember correctly, one neuron's the one electrode tip should be able to listen to roughly 200 or 400 neurons in terms of distance and so on. However, in reality, the electrophysiologists, when they do that spike sorting, it's almost up to 2 or 3 neurons that you can listen to with one single electrode tip, right?
Yep.
And so that's the rough estimate, but it's really crazy.
That's very interesting, actually.
Yeah.
And so my general kind of impression that they based on this super complex and also huge vividness of this consciousness, I feel like any kind of hope to do this, to understand this through the dimensional reduction is going to lose, what we already have is already extremely limited, and we lose even further. So I'm generally skeptical about autoencoder kind of approach, or PCA kind of approach in general to understand consciousness. Even though I understand that it can be useful in some context.
Exactly, but recently the concept of neural manifold is very getting more attention in in the field of neuroscience and computational neuroscience, and they say that the neural manifold is kind of really important for getting information or some PCI application. So I think that you don't need to be too pessimistic. I don't know.
Yeah. One thing is maybe we don't need like single spikes. So maybe that we don't feel individual neurons or individual spikes. So if our target is the content of consciousness, maybe the representation is at a more macroscopic scale. And actually, that's my hope for stimulation. So probably we won't be able to stimulate individual neurons in vivo. And so in that sense, we want to find some sort of macroscopic ways to sort of inject information to the brain.
I also think that way as well, but it's also difficult to find out the right scale of the actual neural responses. We are trying to do something like Eric Hoyle has been doing with Julio in the real system, but it's been very difficult so far.
Yeah, by the way, so this experiment is definitely the important first step for sync communication. But what's the goal of this project? Like,
what's the goal?
Yeah, like by itself, this seems like not much useful, like in our lives.
Yeah.
But
Okay. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So maybe actually like injecting information is not immediately useful. So in a long term, like everyone wants to sort of inject like all kind of sensory experiences directly. But actually, like we can just use VR and just normal displays and sound for sensory input. So actually, we don't need this kind of so direct brain to brain communication. But maybe what's potentially useful is for patients, if we want to sort of decode information, it's probably very hard for patients to sort of try to pronounce 10,000 different words or like listen to like audio books and so on. So ideally, like what we want to do is like if we sort of put these electrodes in, and then just by recording, then we know how to interface with the brain. So then and if that's more efficient than actually sort of presenting specific stimuli for many hours, then that's going to be useful. But it's an optimistic idea.
Well, what's the current situation or sort of the status of this actual implant of these electrodes into the human? Like Elon Musk has been doing it really extensively, right? But I also know that since 2000, when I joined the Caltech, and then I've seen Richard Anderson's group has been trying to do it for at least more than 28 years, and still it's very difficult. Is it just like the safety issue or hygiene issue or whatever still making it very difficult, or is it a demand that is not there?
Well, I think technology already exists, and yeah, actually, when I saw this like a Neuralink's recent demonstration, I saw like two completely different types of response. So many neuroscientists were not so impressed because we already had this kind of thing before. So in that sense, you know, some neuroscientists seemed more frustrated because like Elon Musk presents this as a completely new thing, but this technology already existed 20 years ago. So that's one kind of response. But another response is much more positive. So this is like very like sleek technology, recording from like really many like electrodes, and I think there was like 1,024 times 2 or something, and also like it's invisible, completely wireless, Bluetooth, low energy consumption. So these are like very important properties for the commercial application, and so in that sense, so like if we want to make this kind of technology available for patients, then they are making like really major breakthrough. So yeah, so that's the kind of sort of very discrepant responses I saw. Um, so in that sense, I think they're making a great progress, and probably a lot of neuroscientists actually want to use their system. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of technology, yes, and also, I'm not that pessimistic in terms of, the actual technology, but what's happening in reality, are there lots of patients already implanted with their electrodes, or what's the status? That's my question.
No, they haven't done humans.
Yeah,
yet.
okay.
Yeah.
And the reason is the safety or ethics, or?
Well, I think they are working on the FDA approval, so
Okay.
so maybe pretty soon, like they will start testing on patients.
Okay.
By the way, so you mentioned about the application to patients, but even for healthy subjects, I think this. I'm thinking this sync communication as a Qualia communication or Qualia transfer. Like even I mean the our Korea basically cannot be articulated in language, so we cannot communicate our quality of consciousness by language. In that case, this kind of direct communication should be useful. Or
Yeah, so that actually my motivation was to test like artificial qualia, and like we often talked about this like twins whose like thalamus was kind of connected congenitally, and then they seem to share qualia. So that shows there must be a way to share experiences if we manage to connect brains directly. And yeah, so yeah, eventually, so the scientific question I want to answer is whether we can kind of create certain types of qualia in a sort of in a box, and then connect that to the brain, and then test whether the experience corresponds to what we would predict from the the mechanisms in the box.
I don't know whether that's actually the kind of the direction that we need to go right now. What I mean is that even if Masami is correct that we don't have a language to transfer what I'm seeing to you right now, and then if this technology or something else can directly transfer what I'm seeing to you, how do you test it, or how do you verify that's what what it was supposed to do?
that is a
How to test.
theory. That is some theory, I think.
That's okay, but I feel like it's also
I mean, our psychophysics framework could be used.
yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at in a sense. I mean, I really think that the experiential side has been really poorly developed over the last many decades. So
That's true. That's true.
some kind of also breakthrough to get more of this experience in some way is necessary.
Yeah, but in our Korea structure grant, we are proposing a new framework for testing whether some Korea is same as the different Korea possibly in different subjects.
Like this is the kind of my random idea right now, but is there any people trying to do GAN between GAN generated image versus your own experience? You know what I'm saying? I see this, and then you try to generate that, and then on the project it, and then I say no, that's not what I'm saying, and then trying to match with what I'm saying, what I'm seeing based on the current brain activity.
No, I don't think that has been done, but I know there's a sort of a human in the loop kind of GAN training, so people work as a discriminator. So that kind of experiment exists.
I see. But if you try to do that, and then if you are successful in doing that, then it starts to become closer to kind of at least to extract out what I'm experiencing into the world, right? And then that would be probably the first step before directly generating experience and then transfer it to another people.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I don't have the slide, but actually, one idea is just to generate things rather than injecting to other animals. So, but of course, like Kamitani-san's work is already like along that line, and yeah, but if we use GAN or the generative models, it's possible to generate a reasonably convincing output. So what we want to do is to generate speech, sound, and images. So those are those are the first steps.
Okay. Shall we talk about the last part?
Last part, okay.
Or we can do the interview thing.
It's fine. I think it's probably, we have only 24 minutes, so it's not so useful to go back to the interview.
Right. Okay, so then let's move on to
Because the last part is more to do with, what I'm also interested in.
That's true.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So this is the last part. Maybe you don't like it, but I think it's interesting. Okay. So so I have been it's related to higher order theory, and I've been thinking what it means to have meta representation. And so, for example, so the idea is okay. So first, let me explain briefly what latent space is. So if you use something like autoencoder, then you find compressed representation of the images like this, and then very often you find sort of meaningful structure in this latent space. And but what we are doing as a way to create meta representation is to sort of encode neural networks and then represent neural networks in the latent space. So if we do this, then we can convert processes into objects, and I think this is a meta representation. So the reason why.
Wait. I don't understand. So you are trying to. The input is a network structure itself.
Well, it could be the whole network, the weights and biases.
And also how the node is connected.
Yeah, so at this stage, we keep the architecture constant.
And you have many different kinds of such. And then you are trying to input that into this system and then reconstruct the architecture of the network.
Yeah.
Well, architecture is kept.
Yeah, in this case, ideally we want to be able to handle all possible architectures, but for simplicity, we keep the architecture constant, so the same number of layers, same number of units, but they are trained on different tasks. Yeah.
So basically, weights are the input.
Yeah, weights are the input. Yeah.
And then also input-output relations are also inputs.
I mean, weights are determined. Input-output relations are also uniquely determined.
Yeah, actually, there are two ways to do it. So in this paper, actually, it's interesting. This is from Max Tegmark's group. So they used the task as the sort of input. So this x prime and y prime are the data and labels. So this kind of set constitutes our task. So and also for neural networks, you can sort of use many input-output relationships. You can generate a lot of data from this and then use it for encoding the network. But so there's some duality between input-output relationship and weights. So in the extreme case, if you know all input-output relationship, then it's the same thing as knowing the function itself. So but
this may digress a little bit, but because we are towards the end, so maybe I'll intentionally do that. But if then apply some kind of an unfolded network, which generates the same kind of input output, thing like Dorig is saying. What do you expect to reconstruct? Like, let's say, you generate some kind of, recurrent network, and then, pass on, different kind of input and output, and then based on that, if you try to reconstruct it, do you reconstruct a feed-forward network or recurrent network?
That's a good question. So, but if the generator is trained on feed-forward network, then this kind of then if you use input-output relationship, then this can convert recurrent network to a feed-forward network.
Okay. All right. Okay, let's go.
Yeah. So, for example, like this paper encodes task. Actually, task and input-output relationship are very similar in concept. So, once the network is trained well enough, then input-output relationship is very similar to the task itself. And then so meta recognition model encodes the task, and then it generates weights for this task-specific model. So basically, when you encode a new task, then it generates a neural network. It's kind of like similar to this idea, but here, rather than in this paper, rather than weights, you can use input-output relationship. And also, like Antoine's paper also looked at this kind of input-output relationship. I didn't. When I was working on metacognition, I didn't think about this so much, but actually, like he already had this similar idea before. And
Wait. So was it like a reconstruction of the network, really?
No, this one doesn't do reconstruction of network, but it looks at, there's a module that looks at input-output relationship.
The comparator.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the motivation of encoding neural networks like this is that we wanted to see so there has been always like this question about why sound feels like sound and then vision feels like vision. So this like qualia so difference in qualia across modalities may be related to how the network computes relevant features. So of course, one way to do it is to apply IIT and then try to sort of dissociate neural networks trained on auditory input and then compare that to neural networks trained on visual input. So that was that's something I always wanted to do, but then for like real neural networks, this becomes very difficult. So instead of applying IIT, I wanted to sort of find sort of properties of neural networks by encoding them by a meta neural network. So that's the motivation, and in this case, we trained neural networks for 3 different classification tasks. So here, like we are not even comparing like a vision versus audition, but here we have just 3 different types of tasks, and stimuli have different properties. And for each task, we trained like 333 or so neural networks, and then they are just a set of weights. And then if we train a meta model, then we can easily discriminate these tasks. So basically, the weights have the information about the task. So that's kind of suggests my original sort of conjecture is correct, but it doesn't actually tell us so much about the relationship between these different types of tasks. So, but but what we are working on now is to sort of embed these different neural networks in a common latent space, instead of just doing discrimination, and then
to
trying to
see
see
which new networks are similar to each other, kind of thing.
yeah, something like this. Yeah, so that's the idea. And yeah, and also like our expectation is like if we do like color classification with neural network, then for like each unit, we may be able to sort of reconstruct like this kind of structure. So that's the expectation.
Why do you expect this? I couldn't follow the logic.
Yeah. Well, why?
Like
if this is if this is seeing something like similar to humans, then we may find like similar structure.
Yeah. But I don't see the connection between this slide and the previous slide.
Okay. So yeah, actually, like we have been like trying many different ways to characterize neural networks. So here we are just thinking about weights, but in this case we are thinking more about the relationship between input output, and then output it's just one unit. So then we can sort of embed the individual units in the final layer relative to the input. Yeah. So then.
So the final layer of this color classifier thing is just one unit or multiple units?
Yeah, multiple units, but they correspond to different color.
And then the output is a color label or?
Color label, yeah.
Like it says orange or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
And then it generates the kind of the luminance, hue, and saturation kind of thing. That's your hope.
Yeah, that's my hope. But I think like having this kind of meta representation is useful. Let's see. Yeah, for example, like we can encode like many different neural networks to a common space, which I call Qualia, and so then we can talk about whether representation or neural network for detecting, let's say, a car is similar to detecting a face or something like that. Then we can talk about similarities between like different types of processes. Yeah, well, of course, I don't know whether it's possible, but this is something that we're trying to do. And yeah, so my expectation is to find some sort of like a domain in this Qualia space for like auditory processing and visual processing and so on. And but another interesting thing is if we can sort of find we can also do something like word to vec in this space and then generate new neural networks to solve new problems. So, but I think like having this kind of representation is also useful when we sort of compare different experiences. So like whether like red is similar to orange or yellow and so on. So
yeah, maybe this works, but I'm skeptical about this. The one of the reasons is that if you want to compare the difference or similarity between all these modalities and so on, I would imagine that it's much more straightforward to, let's say, even in the rats or mouse, to get all the connectivity data and then look at the sort of the topological characteristic in each of the modality. And then let's say, some sensory cortical neurons tend to have this and this, input and output kind of relationships. And then even at the really local scale, like, we can now compute the information structure of 4 neurons really quickly. And so if you do that for many different possible combination of four neurons within somatosensory and then auditory and then visual, then I think it's much more direct kind of comparison between the type of the qualia structure property to these information structure mapping is possible.
Yeah,
But because you're
yeah.
kind of trying to convert this first into the task or input output space, which may or may not be relevant for qualia, it may go into be somewhere completely diverging from the qualia space.
Yeah, but what I'm thinking is something like let's say like there is some sort of function from B1 to B2. So first let's say B1 gets activated, and then that pattern of activation in B1 sort of stimulates neurons in B2, and so there's some sort of like transformation of the information. And but then if we have can learn to represent what kind of information processing happens between B1 and B2, just in analogy with like encoding the task. So when you have input-output relationship, you can also learn to represent it. So in the same way, like there are like many combinations of regions, and then between them, we can have some sort of meta representation of sort of relationship between different regions. So I think learning this, I don't know if this exists in the brain, where we are actually trying to find such a thing in resting state of MRI. But if but it's from like brain connectivity point of view, it seems relatively straightforward to sort of construct this kind of meta representation. And once we have something like this, then we can use that representation to talk about processes as objects. And well, again, this is just speculation, but having that kind of representation may be the reason why we can talk about some similarities in different experience.
By the way,
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, how is this related to the global rated workspace? It
Yeah. Okay. So
sounds like a similar idea.
Yeah. So actually, yeah, the reason why I thought this kind of representation should exist is because there are many specific modules in the brain, and we don't know which one to use. So when you have a task, you want to sort of use the most relevant network to solve the problem. And yeah, but we want to also have a sort of representation of all the modules, sort of as a kind of with this kind of setup. Then you can sort of internally compute which network to use to solve a new problem. So we want to be able to represent quality of processes or qualitative similarities of the modules we have in the brain.
Yeah, but this is kind of the relationship between the processes, and the processes talks about some set of qualia, like for example, in the case of color, red, blue, and many things exist. But here you talk about only the color processes in general. How do you combine this view with the specific qualia, like red or blue?
Yeah. So I think for example, detecting red is also a process.
Yeah.
So each individual experience is a processes. So I don't know if this is relevant for category theory. But as I hear about category theory, it's different from set theory, right? So we tend to think about qualia as the sort of element in a set, so kind of like a vector or something. But instead of looking at qualia as a state or a vector, here I'm proposing we should take qualia as a function. So here, like perception of color red is not to activate red unit, but it's about using the function that converts inputs to detect redness.
But the way normal people are considering this function, and also we or IIT is considering these things as almost like function like thing is different in several ways. That's why I kind of wanted to discuss about relationship between your ideas and also unfolding argument stuff in the previous slide that I prepared. But if that probably the difference between your view and other unfolding argument or other types of the functionalist type view is that you are considering the function to be implemented within some kind of local network within the brain. That's already more or less like sufficient to generate the conscious experience of the color or whatever, right? And then these network itself are related to each other. And that's the kind of the function that you're thinking, but most of the probably functionalist type idea is visual input as an input and then experience as an output kind of function. That's very different from your view, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah, in my view, the process itself generates experience.
And then if that's the case, then IIT's view is also like that, right? Like if there is a TPM describing how the system transfers transmit from one state to the another, that is based on the connectivity and the rules of the causal interaction between the units, and then if the states of this system is determined, then that specifies the qualia. But you also talked about so both are not mutually inconsistent, but related highly. Anyway, I don't know. How do we conclude this session is next problem that we have to solve, but it's coming closer to 1 p.m. and as that has been pretty much like what we planned to do. So Masafumi, do you want to say some kind of concluding remarks?
Very useful. It's difficult to conclude today's discussion. But what we are going to we are trying to do in Qualia Structure projects, and what Ryota and also I are trying to do in Moonshot project, I think closely related. So we can continue discussions like this, building into project. So
okay. All right, that's good. That's a good concluding remark. Thank you for the people who listened, and see you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, bye.